When the Galactic Biological Survey first compiled their threat assessment database, they'd anticipated needing maybe 12 danger classifications, tops. After reviewing Earth's ecosystem, they'd needed to invent 73 new categories, file 6 formal complaints with the Department of Evolutionary Probability, and put, according to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Put 3 researchers into mandatory counseling. Earth, as it turned out, was absolutely, categorically, horrifyingly out of its mind. This wasn't the sort of casual observation one made about a planet with questionable cuisine or bizarre mating rituals. No, this was the kind of bone-deep, instinctual terror that came from reviewing Earth's biological database and realizing that evolution on that particular rock had apparently been drunk, violent, and possibly suffering from severe anger management issues for roughly 4 billion years. The Galactic Biological Survey had classification systems for worlds. Class A planets produced herbivores with the survival instincts of particularly optimistic moss. Class B worlds had some predation, usually involving creatures that wouldn't look out of place in a children's educational program. Class C through F ranged from mildly dangerous to maybe bring a weapon. Earth was Class Z, a category that had been invented specifically for it, and which roughly translated to absolutely not. Are you insane? No. The survey report, filed approximately 200 years ago when humanity had first broadcast their presence to the wider galaxy, had made for entertaining reading. Entertaining in the way that horror literature was entertaining, provided one enjoyed existential dread with their breakfast. The Xylene researcher who'd compiled it had apparently suffered a minor psychological break halfway through cataloging Earth's ocean life and had to be sedated. The final report included footnotes like, "This creature kills for sport. This one has venomous spurs on its heels despite being a mammal, which shouldn't be possible. And they named this one leopard seal, and it hunts penguins for fun while sharks refuse to go near it." But the truly baffling part, the element that had xenobiologists across the galaxy questioning their understanding of evolutionary psychology, was that humans had somehow survived all of this and decided the appropriate response was to turn half these nightmares into pets. Dogs. Humans kept domesticated wolves in their homes. With their children, cats. Miniature apex predators that killed billions of small animals annually, purely for recreational purposes, and humans found this endearing. The list went on, growing progressively more unhinged, until one reached the section about humans who kept reptiles, arachnids, and in some cases, actual venomous snakes as companions. Station Kepler 7, hanging in stable orbit around a binary star system roughly 40 light-years from Earth, represented the Galactic Coalition's attempt at collaborative science. 17 species maintained research facilities here, sharing discoveries, conducting joint experiments, and generally pretending that centuries of evolutionary differences didn't make every interspecies interaction a carefully choreographed dance of cultural sensitivity. The station administrator, a Vexillian named Korth, had approximately 90 problems on any given rotation, and recently, about 60 of them involved humans. Vexillians had evolved on a world where the most dangerous predator was a bird that occasionally ate carrion. They were a species of long-eared, soft-furred bipeds whose idea of aggression involved strongly worded committee meetings and passive-aggressive memo distribution. Korth's species had developed space travel, faster-than-light communication, and impressive bureaucratic systems, all without ever having to worry about being eaten. Meeting humans had been educational. Traumatizing but educational. The Human Xenobiology Division occupied Sector 7C, a section of the station that other species had taken to calling the Death World Wing, with varying degrees of humor and horror. This was where human researchers studied specimens from various planets, including, naturally, their own. Korth had tried to implement restrictions, sensible ones, like, please don't bring anything that could kill someone without trying very hard. But humans had this infuriating way of smiling with entirely too many teeth and saying things like, "define kill," or, well, technically everything's dangerous if you think about it, or Korth's personal least favorite, "Don't worry, this one's actually pretty chill." The newest human researcher had arrived 3 cycles ago. She was a specialist in developmental xenobiology, which apparently meant she studied how baby creatures grew, learned, and developed survival strategies. She had impeccable credentials, 2 doctoral degrees, and the unnerving habit of describing the most horrifying predators in the galaxy with the same tone one might use to discuss particularly clever houseplants. Her arrival interview had been enlightening in ways Korth's therapy sessions were still unpacking. "So you study juvenile specimens," Korth had said, reviewing her file on his data tablet while trying not to notice how the human's eyes tracked movement with predatory precision. "That's right," she'd replied, smiling. Humans smiled a lot. It was apparently meant to be friendly. It showed many teeth. Korth's hindbrain remained unconvinced about the friendly part. "And you've requested permission to maintain a live specimen collection. Just a small one. Mostly harmless stuff." Korth had learned, through painful experience, that when humans said harmless, they meant something very different from what the rest of the galaxy meant. Define harmless. Nothing venomous, nothing with a bite force over, say, 300 psi, nothing that's reached sexual maturity, and definitely nothing that sees other sentience as food. She'd tick these off on her fingers like she was listing grocery items, not potential station-wide catastrophes. 300 psi, Korth's species could bite with approximately 40 psi, and that was if they were really upset about something. It's not that much, really. A human bite is around 200, just for reference. This was not, in Korth's opinion, the reassuring comparison she seemed to think it was. But the station's charter included provisions for species-specific research, and technically, the human hadn't violated any written protocols. Korth had approved the request with the kind of resignation one develops when working in middle management across multiple star systems. He'd also updated his personal insurance policy and started keeping emergency sedatives in his desk drawer. The Human Xenobiology Lab was a climate-controlled space filled with containment units, monitoring equipment, and what Korth considered an alarming number of warning labels. The human researcher had set up her workspace with efficient precision, each specimen container properly sealed, labeled, and equipped with species-appropriate environmental controls. To her credit, she maintained detailed logs, filed reports on schedule, and had installed enough safety redundancies to satisfy even the station's most paranoid engineer, a Quilixian who'd once spent 4 hours calculating the structural stress factors of a potted plant. Other researchers had started visiting the lab out of morbid curiosity. The human seemed delighted to have an audience, explaining each specimen's evolutionary adaptations with genuine enthusiasm that somehow made the information more disturbing rather than less. "This little guy's from the Amazonian region," she'd explained to a group of visiting scientists, indicating a small arthropod in a sealed container. "Bullet ant. The name comes from the fact that its sting feels like being shot." "And you keep this why?" asked a Thalorian researcher, their crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that suggested deep confusion. "They're fascinating from a chemical signaling perspective. Plus, look at those mandibles. Beautiful adaptation." The Thalorian had looked. The Thalorian had then excused themselves and not returned. But the human seemed happy. Her specimens were contained, and Korth had started to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this assignment wouldn't result in the kind of incident that required filing reports in triplicate to the Coalition Safety Committee. This optimism, as is so often the case with optimism, was about to be thoroughly disproven by reality's tendency toward chaos, human nonchalance, and one very small, very determined creature with excellent climbing skills. The rotation cycle was halfway through second shift when everything went sideways, which, in retrospect, was exactly when these things always happened. The xenobiology lab hummed with the quiet efficiency of climate control systems and monitoring, equipment doing their jobs without complaint. Specimen containers lined 3 walls, each one a self-contained ecosystem maintaining precise temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition for whatever occupant currently resided within. The human researcher stood at her primary workstation, updating behavioral observation logs with the methodical focus of someone who genuinely enjoyed cataloging how various species learned to hunt, forage, or avoid becoming something else's lunch. Her datapad stylus moved across the screen in quick, efficient strokes. Container 47B needed its substrate changed. Container 52A's occupant had finally figured out the puzzle feeder, which was ahead of developmental projections by 3 days. Container 63C required a temperature adjustment of 0.5 degrees because apparently some species were extremely particular about their environmental conditions, and who could blame them, really? She just finished logging the feeding schedule updates when her peripheral vision caught movement that shouldn't have been there, specifically movement outside a container. The human's head turned with the kind of calm assessment that came from years of fieldwork in environments where panic got you killed. Her eyes tracked the small shape moving across the lab floor with definite purpose, heading directly toward her workstation with the determination of someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Well," she said aloud to the empty lab, "that's not ideal." The creature in question measured approximately 15 centimeters long, covered in a coat of mottled brown and cream fur that would have provided excellent camouflage in forest undergrowth. It had rounded ears, a pointed snout, and paws that seemed disproportionately large for its body size. Those paws were currently carrying it across the smooth lab floor with surprising speed, and even more surprising coordination for something that couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old. The human checked the container designation visible on the creature's original habitat. Container 71G, North American river otter, juvenile specimen, approximately 7 weeks of development. Specimen was supposed to be secured behind triple-lock magnetic seals. Apparently, the specimen had opinions about containment protocols. "How did you even manage that?" she asked, crouching down to get a better look at the escapee. The otterkit paused, looked up at her with dark eyes that held absolutely no concept of having done anything wrong, and then resumed its determined journey toward her boots. She should have initiated containment protocols immediately, should have triggered the lab's security system, sealed the exits, and called for backup before attempting to handle an unsecured specimen. That was procedure. That was sensible. Instead, she watched with academic curiosity as the otterkit reached her boot, investigated it briefly with its nose, deemed it acceptable, and then began climbing up, her leg using tiny claws that caught in the fabric of her uniform pants. "You've got excellent grip strength for your age," she observed, staying perfectly still. The kit made a small chirping sound that might have been effort or possibly triumph as it scaled her thigh, traversed her hip, and began working its way up her torso with the focused determination of someone attempting a challenging mountain route. This was when the lab door opened and Korth walked in holding a datapad, clearly intending to discuss something administrative and tedious. What Korth saw, from his perspective, was a human standing suspiciously still, while a small, furry creature from an unverified threat category actively climbed her body with what appeared to be predatory intent. The datapad clattered to the floor. "Don't move!" Korth's voice hit a register that his species typically reserved for imminent apocalyptic scenarios. "Wasn't planning on it," the human replied with remarkable calm for someone being actively scaled by wildlife. "He's doing really well with motor coordination development, and I don't want to disrupt his confidence. That creature is loose." "Yeah, I noticed that too. Pretty impressive escape artistry for a 7-week-old, honestly." The otterkit had reached her shoulder now and was investigating her collar with intense curiosity. Small webbed paws patted at the fabric while its whiskers twitched, processing sensory information about this new vertical territory it had conquered. Korth's fur had fluffed out to approximately twice its normal volume, an involuntary threat response that made him look like he'd been statically charged. "That is an Earth creature, from a Class Z world." "Well, yes, technically all my specimens are from Earth. That's kind of my research focus. You need to activate emergency protocols." "For this little guy?" The human glanced at the otter kit, who had apparently decided her shoulder was an acceptable resting spot and was now curling into a more comfortable position. "He's not exactly a threat. It has teeth." "So do you. So do I, for that matter. Teeth aren't really the concerning factor here." Korth's hand was already reaching for his communicator, pulling it from his belt with trembling fingers that suggested his fight-or-flight response had firmly chosen flight, but was being overridden by administrative responsibility. "I'm calling security." "That seems excessive." "Excessive?" Korth's voice cracked slightly. "There is an uncontained predator from a death world actively climbing on you, and you think security response is excessive?" The human opened her mouth to respond, probably with something that would have made the situation worse through sheer casualness. But that was when the otter kit decided it had done enough climbing for one adventure. The tiny creature, having successfully summited Mount Human and found the view acceptable, let out a small yawn that displayed needle-sharp juvenile teeth. Then it curled, more firmly into the crook between the human's shoulder and neck, tucked its tail around its nose, and with the ultimate confidence of babies everywhere who knew they were safe, fell completely and immediately asleep. The human felt the small body relax, the breathing shift into the deeper rhythm of sleep, and the tiny paws knead slightly against her collar in a movement that was probably instinctive, comfort-seeking behavior. "Oh no," she said softly. "Oh no," Korth repeated, his voice climbing toward panic again. "What does oh no mean? Is it attacking? Is it venomous? Are you being envenomated right now?" "No, nothing like that." The human's expression had shifted into something that Korth's translation software unhelpfully labeled as fond. "He fell asleep on me. I can't move now. That would be rude." There was a moment of profound silence in which Korth's brain attempted to process this statement, failed, tried again, failed again, and then simply gave up on rational thought entirely. "Rude," Korth repeated flatly. "He's sleeping. You don't wake up sleeping babies, that's just basic decency. It's a predator. He's a baby. From Earth." That doesn't make him less tired, apparently. Korth's communicator was already connecting to station security. His voice came out in a rush of words that probably violated several interspecies communication protocols about maintaining calm during emergencies. "Security, this is Administrator Korth. I need an immediate response team to Xenobiology Lab 7C. We have an uncontained specimen situation. Yes, from the human section. No, I don't know the threat level. Because the human says it's rude to establish threat levels while it's sleeping. Just get here now." The human, for her part, had carefully adjusted her posture to better support the sleeping otter kit, cradling her arms slightly to provide a more secure platform. The creature snored softly, a sound that was objectively adorable and which was doing absolutely nothing to calm Korth's skyrocketing stress levels. "You know," the human said conversationally, "otters are actually considered one of the more social mustelids. They're playful, intelligent, and in the wild, they maintain complex family structures. This little one is probably exhausted from all that climbing. It's actually remarkable cognitive development that he recognized me as safe enough to sleep on." "Safe," Korth said, and the word came out slightly strangled. "You're telling me that creature chose you as a safe sleeping location?" "Well, yeah. I've been handling his feeding and habitat maintenance since he arrived. He's imprinted on me as a caregiver figure, which is perfectly normal for this developmental stage." Normal. Korth was starting to realize that his concept of normal and the human concept of normal existed in completely different reality frameworks that occasionally collided with disastrous results. The otter kit shifted slightly, making a small sound in its sleep. That was somewhere between a chirp and a purr. One tiny paw stretched out, flexed, and then relaxed again against the human's collar. "He's dreaming," the human whispered, genuine delight in her voice. Look at his paws twitching, probably dreaming about swimming. They start developing swimming reflexes around this age, even before they're ready for water. Station security was going to arrive in approximately 90 seconds. They were going to find a human standing peacefully in her lab with an Earth predator sleeping on her shoulder while she narrated its REM cycle like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Korth was absolutely certain that his next performance review was going to be a disaster. His stress leave application would be approved immediately. And somewhere in the Galactic Coalition headquarters, someone was going to add another footnote to Earth's file. Probably something like, "Humans will let Death World predators sleep on them and consider this normal behavior. Recommend increased psychological screening for all human researchers, or possibly for everyone else who has to work with them." The Otterkit snored on, blissfully unaware that it had just triggered a station-wide security response and given one Vexillian administrator a stress headache that would require pharmaceutical intervention. The human just smiled, adjusted her shoulder slightly to provide better support, and went back to mentally cataloging behavioral observations like this was all perfectly routine, which, from her perspective, it probably was. That was the really terrifying part. Station security arrived with the kind of tactical precision typically reserved for containing biohazard breaches or repelling hostile boarding actions. 4 personnel in full environmental suits burst through the lab doors, weapons drawn but set to stun, scanning for the threat that had prompted an administrator-level emergency call. What they found was considerably less dramatic than their equipment suggested was necessary. The human stood near her workstation, completely relaxed, with a small furry creature visibly sleeping against her shoulder. She looked up at the security team with the mild expression of someone who'd been interrupted during routine paperwork rather than someone in the middle of a containment crisis. "Hey," she said quietly, raising one finger to her lips in a universal shushing gesture. "Keep it down. He's sleeping." The security team leader, a Kryn whose multiple eyes could process threat assessment across several visual spectrums simultaneously, stared at the scene with profound confusion. Administrator Korth reported an uncontained specimen emergency. "Oh, that." The human glanced down at the sleeping Otterkit. "Yeah, he got out of his habitat. Pretty clever for his age, actually. I'm still not sure how he bypassed the magnetic locks. That creature is from Earth." The security leader's translator managed to convey both horror and accusation simultaneously. "Yep. It is currently on your person. Also, yep. And you have not attempted to contain it." The human's expression shifted into something that suggested she was choosing her words carefully, which was somehow more alarming than if she'd just been reckless. "Well, he climbed up here and fell asleep. Moving him now would disrupt his rest cycle, which could impact his neurological development during a critical growth phase." One of the security officers, a young Thalorian on their first deep space assignment, spoke up with the kind of confusion that came from textbook training colliding with inexplicable reality. "But it's dangerous. He's 7 weeks old. It has claws. So do half the species on this station. Those claws are currently embedded in your uniform." The human looked down, noticed this was technically accurate, and shrugged with a shoulder that wasn't currently occupied by sleeping wildlife. "They're not embedded. They're just catching on the fabric. His motor control is still developing." Korth pushed through the security team, his fur still fluffed to maximum volume. "You cannot seriously expect us to simply wait until that creature wakes up naturally." "Why not? He'll probably sleep for another hour or so, and then I'll put him back in his habitat with improved containment measures." "An hour?" "Maybe 90 minutes. Juvenile sleep cycles vary." The security team exchanged glances that suggested they were all silently questioning whether their training had adequately prepared them for humans. The consensus appeared to be a resounding no. The standoff lasted approximately 20 minutes before the Otterkit decided, with the impeccable timing of children everywhere, that nap time was over. The small creature stirred, stretched in a way that involved every muscle from nose to tail tip. and then opened dark eyes that blinked slowly at the assembled security team with the kind of innocent curiosity that had absolutely no awareness of the diplomatic incident it had caused. Then it chirped. Not a threatening sound, not a predatory warning, just a small, questioning vocalization that roughly translated to, "Where am I?" and also, "I might be hungry." The human's face did something that Korth's species had no cultural equivalent for, but which humans apparently called melting. Her entire expression softened into something that suggested the otter kit had just won some sort of unspoken competition. "Good morning, troublemaker," she said softly, reaching up to gently scratch behind one of those rounded ears. The otter kit leaned into the touch, made a sound that could only be described as pleased, and then proceeded to investigate her hand with its nose, whiskers twitching as it processed scent information. "You're petting it," one of the security officers said, their voice climbing toward disbelief. "He likes having his ears scratched. Most mammals do, actually. It's a bonding behavior." The otter kit, having determined that the hand was friendly and also not food, began grooming itself with the fastidious attention to cleanliness that mustelids were known for. Tiny paws worked through its fur, the pink tongue visible as it cleaned its face with movements that were objectively adorable. Korth watched this display with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled. That is an apex predator from a Class Z death world. Well, he will be when he grows up, the human agreed, carefully lifting the otter kit from her shoulder and cradling it in both hands. The creature settled into this new position without protest, apparently content to continue grooming while being held. Right now, he's a baby who needs frequent meals, temperature regulation support, and social interaction for proper psychological development. It could bite you. He could, the human acknowledged. But he won't, because I'm not a threat and he's not defensive. Otters are actually pretty chill as far as predators go. The security leader had lowered their weapon at some point during this exchange, apparently coming to the conclusion that whatever threat level they'd been briefed about was not matching observable reality. "How is your species still alive?" "What do you mean?" "You see danger and your response is to..." The security leader gestured vaguely at the human holding the otter kit. "This." The human considered this question with genuine thoughtfulness. "I think it's because we learned early that not everything that can hurt you wants to hurt you. Context matters. This little guy isn't being aggressive. He's being curious and social. That's completely different behavioral motivation." "On my world," Korth said slowly, "if something has the capacity to harm you, you avoid it. This is basic survival logic. On my world, if we avoided everything that could potentially harm us, we'd never have left the caves, which, incidentally, were also full of things that could kill us. So that didn't really work as a long-term strategy either." The otter kit had finished grooming and was now investigating the human's fingers with intense focus, occasionally mouthing at them with the gentle pressure of a creature that was exploring, not attacking. When it encountered her thumb, it grabbed onto it with both front paws and attempted to wrestle it the way young otters practiced hunting techniques on non-threatening objects. "He's playing," the human explained, watching the kit with obvious fondness. "This is how juvenile mustelids develop coordination and hunting skills. It's completely normal behavior." Normal. That word again. The human walked to container 71G, still holding the playing otter kit, and made adjustments to the locking mechanism. "I'll need to file an incident report about the containment breach and upgrade the security protocols. He's smarter than I gave him credit for." She gently placed the otter kit back into its habitat, where it immediately dove into a small water feature and began swimming with the joyful enthusiasm of someone reunited with their favorite activity. The human watched for a moment, sealed the container with new security measures, and then turned back to the assembled group. "So," she said brightly, "anyone need therapy animal recommendations? Because I have to say, this little incident really demonstrates the stress reduction benefits of interspecies bonding." Korth made a sound that his translator couldn't process. The security team filed out without another word. And somewhere in the Galactic database, another footnote was added to Earth's file. Humans will domesticate anything, possibly including other sentient species. Recommend maintaining cautious distance and perhaps investing in stress management reso.